Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm your co-host, Michelle Gouveia.
And I'm your co-host, Tom Wilde.
And we are thrilled today to be joined by Rory Yates, the Chief Strategy Officer of EIS. Rory, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Before we jump into all the questions that Tom and I have for you, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your background and what you do in your current role?
Yeah, sure. So for those of you who don't know, EIS is a piece of software you can run an entire insurance business on. We have about 29 customers around the world. We're US-based. We're a San Fran-based business. I have a love-hate relationship with insurance, so I'm back in the insurance game, but I've been in and out of this sector a number of times, either through capital investor turnarounds or startups predominantly, working across various parts of the insurance sector. But as a strategist, I spend most of my time unusually in insurance, dwelling in anthropology, psychology, and neurology, and I spend a lot of my time looking outside to look back into our business. So I work extensively. That's why I do these things like podcasts and spend my time trying to see what the market is up to. So maximizing my time with customers, prospects, analysts. That's where I spend most of my time.
Excellent. Well, Rory, maybe we'll get started, with a question that I think comes up frequently across, all kinds of industries and use cases. But when you think about a policy admin system, is that fair to describe EIS as a PaaS, or do you like to describe it differently?
Interestingly, we're built around a customer. So in some ways, we offer a PaaS. But I think the only thing I would add is that's one of the differentiators. Yeah, we're built around a customer core because actually, we can talk about this later, but policy is a constraint to a lot of things, that concept and construct. So, but yes, we offer a PaaS, yeah.
Okay, so it kind of even more to the point, the product that you guys have built is driven a lot by structured data, right? At the end of the day, the customer needs a source of truth, especially in insurance, to be able to know, well, what coverages did we write, and what risk did we take on, and how did we price it? And most of those are sort of structured data points that become, a source of truth. Then, generative AI shows up and kind of it's like dropping a boulder into a lake, right? And it kind of ripples everywhere. And all of a sudden you have this thing that is really good at interpretation. It can be good at some deterministic things, but is maybe better at non-deterministic things. And you've got to figure out how to meld that with something that at its core is a set of structured data. How have you guys thought about that, and how have your customers thought about how to blend those kind of at times disparate concepts together?
I think it's at the root actually of the challenge that we tried to face in what could be called the pre-AI era, because of the amount that generative AI has done to raise the topic. But actually, various forms of artificial intelligence required a different kind of data fluidity, machine learning, automation itself. And actually, to make it more adaptive, we needed models that, as you say, took highly structured insurance businesses and said, actually, though, you have huge amounts of event data that you could utilize better in customer experiences. You have huge amounts of data-led processes that you need to be able to adapt quickly in automation. You've got things like fraud detection, where we offer a fraud detection product ourselves, but we also integrate with lots out there, which require, a lot of data fluidity. And also the ability to harness things that you get from data. So even if it was a point-to-point data solution, you've got to be able to adjust your processes so that you can handle that outcome differently. And so I think what we focused on is making sure that we built that data fluidity in the best way we possibly can. So we're event streaming based. So we're taking all that, like you say, structured data. Yeah, you want to control how you run a policy as a product, and you want to control various aspects of how you might operate a claim. But then you want to flex how you might look at eligibility. There's complicated things where various policies in lots of insurers operating different technologies have some held in legacy systems, some held in live systems. When they get into claims processes, it's great to have intelligent orchestration like generative AI that can look at both and quickly help them make decisions. So I think in a way we're lucky, because we didn't know it was going to do this. I think when we started this journey, that we didn't know generative AI was going to come along in the way that it has.
Right.
But I think we've done a good job building that data fluidity. And the second thing that we built for, which I think is particularly useful in this AI era, is that we're about widening ecosystems. So we really wanted to build ours ready to create the marketplace of the insurer so that they were in control, they could integrate with partners like you guys, build huge amounts of value, and that rather than being a constraining factor, that we were in fact an enabling factor. So we didn't just want to be API based and all those great terms. And I'm not a techie, so to me sometimes I get sick of those acronyms, but yeah, we wanted to make sure that integrating to value was easy. So that actually that again required that data fluidity, but then the ability to harness it on both sides. So could we provide UI tools that actually the partners utilize that you know that we weren't constraining? Could we build other tool sets? And so I think by doing both of those things, we've put ourselves in a, which is why a lot of our clients are now embracing this world that we're in. I think we put ourselves in a good position. I'd love to say that it was a strategy and we knew exactly what we were doing, but I don't think that's the case. But I think it's probably, as I say, because we wanted to take advantage of some of the things that were already happening.
Rory, we were chatting, before kicking off the episode, talking about, if we're not careful, some of the AI or the systems that carriers implement now will be outdated, in a year. And that was interesting to me, especially because there's this assessment of the insurance industry, right or wrong, however you think about it, that they're slow movers in technology, right? And there's reasons for that. Obviously, the regulatory landscape is just a lot of data internally. It's not as easy as flipping a switch. But when you think about those two things, slow to move against a technology that is moving really fast in terms of how it's developing and changing and being implemented, how do you think insurers can build the right team, have the right processes in place, have the right execution strategy to either pilot or implement technologies that are shifting so quickly that they may be behind the enhancements that get made?
I think it's a really good question, Michelle. You're really talking to a strategist here. This is great stuff. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. The first thing is starting where you ended, which is, yeah, this is an enterprise design challenge. It's not a technology challenge. People throw out stuff like human in the loop, human in control. What about AI should ultimately make the human condition better, full stop. So, we talk a lot about AI freeing human capital, making human-to-human interactions count more, and all that good stuff. But all of that requires people in different positions, understanding how they're interacting with technologies differently. So it's never just going to be a technology challenge with something like AI. And then going back to the beginning of what you said, adaptivity for me will be the defining competitive characteristic of insurance. So when you boil it all down, actually, your speed to adapt to price changing markets, your speed to adapt to risk or embrace new risk mitigating capability, your speed to evolve products and adapt. Look at what we're seeing in California, what we've seen before in Florida. These things require huge amounts of adaptation. The excuse at the moment is I can't price to compete with that risk. Well, the other option would be I can adapt my products and services and build around government services, and now with AI, I can intelligently orchestrate all of that. So AI should be a massive tool for adaptivity. But you've hit the nail on the head. How have we built the foundations for this now AI skyscraper we want to build when actually we thought we were in a single story or two-story building? Actually anybody would tell you you've got to relay the foundation. So some effort's going to be needed to do that. And that bit in the middle that you said, the reason why I say that is AI today is way off what we're going to see in a year's time. And in a lot of cases, it will make whatever you're integrating with and utilizing somewhat redundant, or at least not as good as what other people will be using. So your ability to switch, we're talking a lot with our clients at the moment about multi-agent strategies. The early days, a lot of people play with some of these big monolithic solutions, but actually when you use them open, they have huge amounts of risk. You can't spew all of your customers' data into environments that you don't control. You can't do. So now you need a different kind of model. Well, actually, maybe you need a bit of all of them. And in a lot of cases, I look across some of the use cases, you could say, well, that's got low risk, low data risk, no security concerns. You can utilize other technologies. You're not going to see a single AI solution, although I do believe that is what some people mistakenly are kind of looking for or implementing. So instead, actually, I want to see insurers build this highly adaptive environments and organizations that sit on top. How do you make a decision about what AI to use, how you're going to manage your use case risks? Because when I look across some of the grids that we develop with backlogs where we're addressing clients, some of the stuff's got relatively low value, high risk, and you need an organization that's capable of understanding that quite quickly, that has an AI maturity. And I call the opposite, by the way, artificial ignorance. applying the two letters before a use case you've probably had for 10 years is not sufficient. It was going to require what you said, which is rebuilding a lot of the way insurers work.
That's a great point. Let's build on that a little bit. So what have you seen as sort of successful, what advice do you give customers to avoid sort of the, infinite POC loop, right? How at EIS do you help them think about an effective way to evaluate, a new technology, a new product, a new approach that's meaningful and allows them to get to a good decision? And I think in our experience too, a lot of them are terrified right now. They don't want to buy something that'll be obsolete in a year, but they're not sure how to manage that. How have you guys approached that?
Yeah, pilot purgatory is definitely a big problem in insurance. And I think it's a bigger problem in insurance than other sectors. And I think I've said this before in previous conversations with you guys, and you've agreed that we probably have more to gain from AI in many ways. We're a data intensive industry that tries to do all sorts of fantastic predictive things with data.
Yeah.
And the quicker that we can turn those predictive things with data into things that we can put in the hands of customers, the better that speed and that time. And this is what this new generation of AI technologies can do, because it can deal with the linguistic aspects, the inquiry aspect. What we tend to do, to answer your question, getting customers, getting them started with it, getting them using use cases that perhaps have high value but lower risk is the way that we would tend to try and model that. If you think about, I could build AI systems, and we've got AI analytics tools on top of our platform that can identify target customers and product propensity. Doesn't mean that you hypodermically inject that in the world. You might say, well, for now, that's huge value of that AI. That's a task that I had to extract the data, analyze the data, make decisions and apply it again. You might still, though, have an intervention that's human-led, where you decide whether you're going to act on the way that machine has interpreted that data and identified it, and you might want to interrogate what kind of outcomes it's suggesting that happen. But you're still going to get huge amounts of value. So, and I would say you've interrupted that enough that the risk is low, the regulatory implications are zero. Let's go. Whereas you end up seeing, high value typically use cases, but so much risk. We're going to put it in a POC. We're going to prove it's going to work. That we can allow customers to interrogate any of their policy documents using some kind of linguistic tool. Is fine until you say, well, yeah, but what if it gets it wrong? What if it suggests that you've got coverage you don't, which it's capable of doing, unfortunately. Then you say, well, I might offer a small language model or something I can control. Okay. Typically the costs and implications of doing that outweigh the value. So you need to sit down and really, map this out. I tend to use a very simple grid to talk about value and risk. And that's the starting point, when you overlay use cases against that. And at the moment, I think we can just have a sensible conversation about risk. We're not talking about in-depth understanding of risk, but generally, if you have a data concern, if you have a privacy concern, if you have a human control concern, this is going to allow you to kind of move the risk scale. So I tend to start there. It sounds like a simple response, but it's incredibly powerful. We tend to find that you're adapting backlogs quite quickly, assumed backlogs of where AI is going to add value, and that will free up this POC purgatory quite a lot.
I like that framework a lot, because I come across insurance carriers don't come for me. Like, I'm sure this is not the case for everybody, but not only do they get stuck in this loop of never-ending POCs, but to your point, a lot of times things just die out, and something that did work doesn't move into something that becomes executed, whether that's because they don't have the IT support to manage it going forward, or it's competing priorities between different business units that are trying to leverage AI. So I really like that framework, not just in specific business units, but even across the board, to say, what are the high value, low risk things we can do with AI in underwriting, in claims, in customer support. And then you start to see, are there synergies there? Does it become something, more end to end that becomes high value for multiple organizations within a carrier? So I just like that framework a lot.
Oh, I'm glad. I mean, a good example of you, because you raised the whole customer side. So some people would immediately assume, well, the risk is high on customer. Well, not really, actually. So we're doing one of our clients do automated scripting, call center scripting. Mm-hmm. So it tells the customer, the call handler, what to say, gives them all the context and all that good stuff. actually we can control a lot of that outcome, so we can make sure it doesn't say anything wrong. But also there's a human there that's trained, that understands what they're seeing. All it's doing is cutting out any investigation work that they might have had to do, interrogating maybe different systems, and just made it very simple to say, hey, this customer's coming in, they're in a distress claim experience. It looks like they're here in this experience, therefore it's possible that they're concerned about this. It's just providing great inputs to that customer. High value, low risk. So, it can be really funky stuff. And to your point, Michelle, once you get something out there, it's like sending off a flare. That's the right one, right? It's the one that's going to attract everyone around this topic AI in the right way. And then you can work back and say, look, we actually this was just a high value, low risk case, and that's our focus. And then people typically can go away with that in their minds. We see people submitting stuff. I've got a backlog in our business, and if I look at, I've just glanced, I've got a thing around fraud detection. There's stuff that, that's really high value, that has got relatively low risk, using linguistics technologies, because our fraud detection capabilities are typically machine learning based. But again, we've also got some advanced AI going in there. So, now we've got some traction, and people can kind of, we've got some skill set in there that we can utilize as well. This is all reducing risk. I've got people that understand AI, they understand how to control AI technologies. Actually, all I'm doing is saying, hey, let's move to maths and neurons from, as you said, Tom, earlier, more determinant, technologies. But that leap's not huge, and that's a business risk. That's something we go, oh, there's a whole lot of risk if you're going to massively shift the dial on how someone's used to operating. But actually, somewhere like fraud detection, okay, it's a moderate shift for these guys. They know this stuff.
There's sort of a debate going on as to whether, to be successful, you need to put in work to get your data ready for AI, or that AI will just go find your data for you, right? I'm being a little bit glib, but that is a tension between, hey, it used to be, if your data wasn't strictly prepared, you were not going to succeed with the more it's hard to imagine saying this now, but traditional AI, right? The early versions of AI, versus the promise of agentic, where can it self-reason and go just know what data I should go look for in what system? How do you think about that debate? Where do you come down on that?
That's Tom, that's a really good one. I mean, we've got people like Sam Altman talking about he's not sure which singularity we're at, and
Yeah.
that kind of slightly blows my mind, actually, weirdly. And I've been dealing with AI for 26 years in its old forms as well.
Yeah.
Just because it can do something doesn't mean it should. So first of all, I think we could get AI to completely go find the data, structure the data, control the outcome, right? There's no doubt. But again, I would say, what's the risk of it getting it wrong? What's the risk of the linguistic response perhaps getting that wrong? There's still problems with that at the moment. When we move towards more general AGI, towards more artificial general intelligence, some of that will go away. I can't deny it. This back to the point Michelle raised, which is, so whatever you're implementing now, in a year, that could be highly redundant. You could have built highly structured data systems, created the right level of data fluidity, but still actually potentially built a load of stuff that now looks like modern legacy. It's gonna cause you a wiring problem, and you're gonna have to rewire all this new stuff that could have done it for you anyway. I think some of that's timing as well. So I would say some people, whilst you're exploring some of these technologies and just exploring this new enterprise that you're going to evolve towards, challenge yourself on whether the AI can do all of it. I think is a good question. There was somebody, I was listening to a podcast the other day, I'm going to forget the name, doesn't matter. The person, I think, was on both sides of the fence in terms of how she, but said, actually, though, we should start with the idea that AI can do it all. If we feel it's eroding human value, we should question it and challenge it. If we feel there's risk in the way that it's going to find the data and utilize the data, we should challenge it. But we should start there. So I think, Tom, my response is start there. Start with the idea that AI can do it, because that could avoid a lot of legacy issues. It could avoid a lot of hard wiring that you won't need to do. But probably you'll find at this stage you're going to have to work your way back to some kind of harnessing solution, so that you're harnessing the data and then you're harnessing how you control the AI. So you're going to find your way back to some of these older technologies in order to do it.
No, I like that.
Yeah, go on.
I think I've similar. I've challenged the team with the same idea, which is prove it can't rather than prove it can. As a good starting point, because I think the benefit you get from that at a minimum is it forces you to rethink a lot of your premises and assumptions about the problem, and then you work your way back to something that is feasible, today. whether it's, legacy data issues or legacy platform issues and so forth.
Yeah, completely. If I take the coding side of our business, so obviously as a software business, we have the like you guys, you have the tech luxury to play in that space as well, where
Yeah.
there's low risk but high value potential. But if you look at how it does code, at the moment the case is fairly low because the quality issues and
Yeah.
the rechecking and the fact that actually generally there's low trust. So we talk about the human handshake between the machine, and if that's not there, if the human involved is not going to have that trust, you're going to kill the benefits case pretty quickly. So that's another
Yeah.
one you need to go look at that. But that's a good example of assume could code it though. Assume it could complete it, and then what you're probably going to do is we're going to start challenging ourselves on. Yeah, but if we were utilizing this at full scale and we were doing this a lot, and then we built the quality systems over the top, whatever code assurance model, we probably would get to a lot of value. So now we're at least the roadmap's now heading in the right direction, which is you could conclude it's not as good. I've got developers that will smash the quality and output of AI still. That doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. So you got to kind of work that. I love the prove it can't rather than it can. I love that.
Yeah.
How do you think the regulators will feel about that approach?
Yeah, regulation, it's a good one, right? And insurance is heavily regulated. I think we forget, like, if you take the US insurance market for our clients, it always blows my mind that every state has a different interpretation. It's not even like it's not operating in a different country. And it's not just like a one-off regulatory burden, we get our head around it. It's very nuanced. It's a big changing landscape. I just wrote an article on request about the fact that it's really shifting. And again, our adaptivity point, you've got to change around that. It's going to change around AI. The EU have taken a particular stance that the US haven't. So now you've got these global insurers having to face well, what do I make everyone meet the EU standards, which are more onerous? Looking at resiliency in a different way as well, or do I perhaps figure out in the US, which is you can, and then I'll figure out what you can't do in the EU. There's a lot of complexity in the strategy around it that regulation is driving at the moment. But I think it will continue to be a problem. I think one of the biggest problems is that the accountability and responsibility doesn't shift. And that's why some of these use cases, when I describe that value and risk, they do unfortunately automatically drop bottom left. Because if I remove regulation, they'd be top right, almost overnight. But the regulatory risk is definitely one that's going to continue to affect us and does kill POCs as well. So there are some POCs that I've seen around, even simple stuff actually around personalization, stuff that we'd love to do with customers, where the question is, how do you demonstrate fairness? How do you demonstrate that will work for vulnerable customers? They're good questions. I'm not, by the way, they're perfectly good questions. Some of the answers you can say, well, I can get there. Some of them will kill the use case, pretty quickly.
I think even with agentic AI, which has fascinating potential, I think if we take it to its extreme and start to treat agents as actual part of the labor force, you uncover a whole bunch of questions that have to get answered, such as, well, if you think about how strict we are with system permissioning, for a human employee at the company, do we have to do the same thing for the agents? Like, how do we know what permissions to give these agents? How do we know that we have the audit trail to know what that agent did? How do we revoke permissions? All these things become really fascinating questions. I had and even on the compute side, we woke up a couple mornings ago and found that one of the agents we deployed had gotten kind of stuck in a loop and had racked up like some serious OpenAI expenses, because it was caught in this loop, and we were able to catch it quickly and shut it down. But the ability for these things to scale and even potentially make some mistakes at scale is something that we haven't encountered before, because obviously a worker, an employee could make a mistake, but they can't make the mistake of 1,000 people, right? Because they're one person. Whereas an agent certainly can make the mistake of 1,000 people overnight. So it's that's an interesting thread to pull and think about how we're going to control those risks.
Yeah, 100%. The contrarian view of that as well is that, also, I'm not sure we do control regulatory risk as much as we like to believe.
True.
Actually, AI can help with that, right? So, how about a good high value, low risk use case is an AI agent that enhances your regulatory reporting,
Yeah.
perhaps even automates that entirely, is checking across all of your systems. There is already a gap there. So you could say, well, actually, given what you've just said, Tom, and I completely agree. Well, okay,
Yeah.
let's go and look at AI for regulatory benefits then. Let's go and look at how that's helping us, perform better risk assessments. AI to detect vulnerable customers. Vulnerability is an interesting one for me because lots of regulation in Western markets has put more pressure on insurers to take responsibility for vulnerability, but it's a fluid concept. You're vulnerable in a moment. You might be financially vulnerable now, but you might shift that in a week. There's a lot of data that's moving through that insurers right now don't necessarily utilize. They can't utilize it for relationship value. They can't utilize it to assess risk in that moment. So they ignore it. But actually, if you're saying that we've got to track it, well, AI is probably it's gonna give us a better chance. So there's a risk it misses it, as you said. There's a risk it doesn't. But at the moment, we're just missing it full stop. So actually, we've got a good case to say, well, AI makes this better, right? So I love the fact that you've said that because, as I say, as a strategist, I always try and spin the telescope around, right? So let's look at that. Let's look at this the other end, right?
Great point.
Rory, you've dropped a few examples throughout this conversation, but to make it a specific question and get some of your thoughts out, would love to hear what you've come across or what you think are maybe some lesser known or not as popular high value, high impact use cases for AI that maybe not everyone thinks about, like your regulatory example just now, right? Everyone's thinking about the use cases for enhanced data and underwriting or some type of streamlined claims, supporting the claims adjustment workflow. But what are some of the maybe less popular or lesser known opportunities for AI from your perspective?
That's a really really good one. We'll tease some of those out. Just to start with, I tend to think of certain key buckets throughout the life cycle of insurance. So I don't know if this helps people, but look at it from risk assessment, underwriting, fraud detection, personalizing products and services, and then tend to go to that sort of driving data analytics. And not last, but these aren't in any priority order, then looking at things like customer acquisition, relationship expansion, so the whole customer piece more broadly. If I took ones that people don't tend to focus on, so let's start with some of the topics. I mean, if we take fraud detection, so again, there's an anomaly detection and so on. Machine learning is very good at it. It's very structured. It's great, but actually, it's quite difficult to then capture once you've detected fraud. What do you do with it, and how do you assess it? These are great sort of use cases for starting to utilize generative AI. But I think the biggest risk actually is that fraud is already going to be fueled by generative AI. I have a passionate belief that it's the fraud we don't detect. That's the one that we've really got to work on, right? So we talk about, if you take the UK in consumer markets, there's 3 billion of fraud, but only 1 billion detected. So there's 2 billion left on the table, right? So, but that means stuff's happening that we can't detect, that we can't
Yep.
control.
Mm-hmm.
So the great use cases for automatically starting to use, newer AI technologies to start to do very, varied anomaly detection. There's stuff that's using AI that can look at the paralanguage of your voice. I mean, I didn't know this, but a company that I'm going to forget the name of, but it doesn't matter because the point is, when you lie, your voice box has, and it happens to everybody, you can't control it, has more blood flow through your voice box. That creates very tiny variances in your voice that you and I couldn't detect, but a machine could detect it. Guess what? They've been using it in the CIA and in the MI6 world for a long time, and it's highly advanced. It's now found its way into insurance and financial services. Yeah, that's a really good stretch use case for AI that's got very high value. So and it does it by baselining your voice. So it says something like, "Tell me your name," and your fake name. But that's a lie that will have low variance. So you've baselined it. Now you say something like, "Just tell me where you left the car," and then suddenly it will detect this lie, and it will therefore validate what you might have thought was a fraud. Gets validated very very quickly in a
Yep.
telephone interview. So those kind of those AI use cases. I think, those have got really high value. They are in fact very low cost to implement. We've got some of it operating at the moment in a POC, but it's a live POC. More likely should be described as a pilot, but it's very controlled. It's fantastic. It's fascinating. So that one came to mind. I don't know if that's a stretch use case. You guys are probably like, yeah, we've heard that one before.
It's a good one. I have not heard that.
I had not heard it either. No.
Oh, good, good, good. There's stuff that, on the underwriting side, which I find quite fascinating, which is, utilizing it more for adapting policy outcomes so that it's not gets used heavily in risk assessment, gets used quite, gets is already various forms of AI get used heavily in those, certainly
Yeah.
with the trailblazers of underwriting. So there's a big I did a study with Capgemini Research Institute last year that I was on the executive team of, and there's a big gap between people who trailblaze underwriting and people who don't. And one of the biggest signals of that is their use of AI technologies generally. But there's stuff actually where you can start making products and using AI to produce synthetic responses. So how well would this product sell given our customer base? How much risk would we? Yeah, so it actually starts doing that other side of product generation. Equally, on the risk assessment side, using AI for synthetic data to create synthetic data. And true for fraud as well. So if you want to model stuff, actually generative AI is very, very good at generating outcomes. One of the other sort of stretch use cases which is evolving is if all of our fraudsters are using generative AI and they're creating these very, very realistic images, what could you use in generative AI to detect image anomaly better? And that stuff's really good. Sometimes gets missed off, that one's stretch because I don't see it enough. Not because actually I think it's a stretch thinking. You think, well, to combat AI risk and AI fraud and all those things coming at you, you should probably be utilizing this technology again because any of the corporate risks or regulatory risks you can cover by explaining the fact that you weren't able to detect it anyway, or you weren't able to. So the AI is only enhancing, the positive outcome. It's not, it might still have some risk that it gets it wrong. But if you take fraud detection, you're only going to put that back into a human system anyway, so you can start to work around it. So those are just a few, and I think some of that requires probably slightly different thinking about how AI can be used.
Well, that's a great spot to wrap on. We've been talking to Rory Yates, the head of strategy for insurance platform provider EIS. I'm Tom Wilde, your co-host of Unstructured Unlocked.
And I'm Michelle Gouveia.
Great, Rory. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks, guys.